Up next, we have Marietje Schaake, a rising star of the European Parliament. She just got off the plane from Kenya, actually last night, into Chicago. She's been heading up the European Union's support for a fair and free election for the last few weeks. Let's please welcome Marietje.
Politicians are disconnected from reality, and people trust car salesmen more than their representatives. I hear this is sounding familiar, and indeed, trust in politicians is low. It's too low. And it is upon us to rebuild that trust. Yet, the promises of a return to a romanticized past are deceiving, and closing borders or erecting walls are not the answers to today's global challenges. Instead of turning inward, we must appreciate that the public interest is also at stake in the global arena. At the moment when technology connects us worldwide, it is a matter of leadership and civic duty to shape the society of the future, based on the democratic values that have brought people the highest quality of life, in order to preserve that quality. The reality is that all politicians and each government see influence flowing elsewhere, from nation-state governments to the local level to networks and multilateral organizations, from public institutions to private companies, from democracies to authoritarian states. Now, some may say, from the positive side, individuals have become so empowered that they no longer depend on government. Isn't that great? But on the downside, democratic principles are being eroded and even replaced with profit models and authoritarian governance. The digital revolution is leading to a redistribution of power that is not matched with the redistribution of accountability and oversight. So, is this the end of democratic governments, and will algorithms, artificial intelligence, and robots just take over? Will all politicians be fired? No. But we do need a radical rethink and reinvent democratic governance in a world where everyone and everything will soon be digitized and connected. While the role of governments is changing, global technology companies are now the ones confronted with challenges that traditionally landed exclusively on the desks of diplomats and politicians. Should media apply censorship under pressure? Who to call when the internet is shut down entirely in an attempt to control people? And which legal checks and balances are in place before content is taken offline? According to which law? Global technology companies are the new sovereigns, but they're designed and engineered to maximize profit, not democracy. And the de facto norms that they set can lead to conflict with the rule of law, also in democracies. A large social media platform recently removed pictures of a centuries-old statue in Italy, sexually explicit. The same happened to the iconic picture of the Napalm Girl. A video of a political speech I personally gave addressing the need to end torture was removed, taken offline, labeled as spam. Now, I know speeches in European Parliament are not always the most inspiring, but they could not legitimately be labeled as spam, and political speech must be free. Social media platforms have become political arenas and catalysts for junk news sprawling. They're also the only place where most young people see news. But probably the most far-reaching impact of digitization and subsequent power shifts is the loss of the state's monopoly on the use of force. States are less and less capable of maintaining exclusive control over critical infrastructure and of defensive and offensive technologies. Instead, they procure technologies, often with far-reaching capabilities, and then they're not able to stop worldwide proliferation of these tools afterwards. We must urgently avoid that the digitization of everything becomes the privatization of everything and the weaponization of everything. When every device, from a hairdryer to a self-driving car, can be used for malicious attacks, even without the user knowing it, who is responsible for enforcing safeguards? With the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, the relationship between the public interest and private companies takes on an entirely new dimension. So in short, technology companies have a growing impact on the state of democracy, and states operate with a growing dependence on technology companies. In this new reality, the interdependence of well-functioning digital infrastructure applies to both governments and companies. They need it, because no one can afford a breakdown of the global banking system, for example. Now, historically, when new technical possibilities arose and interdependence became stronger, the momentum for global norms opened up. With the introduction of cars came the need to develop new traffic and safety laws. And the law of the seas was developed to ensure that free passage and governance of ships through international waters was arranged. And to avoid mutually assured destruction or nuclear warfare, non-proliferation treaties were born. So now is the time to develop the governance of our global online space. Without norms governing the global digital networked ecosystem, the legal vacuums that companies continue to operate in will grow wider and deeper. And this, in turn, risks further eroding trust in tech companies themselves, as well as in the governments, for whom these global players seem entirely out of reach. We already see pushback against big Silicon Valley players who are accused of negligence to defend democracy. But when global tech giants do take a greater responsibility for safeguarding democratic and public principles, it will have a positive ripple effect. We should aspire to see democracy going viral. And there's no time to lose. With growing ambitions of authoritarian states to dictate global norms of their own, wishing to maximize control over the internet, bringing governance of technologies within their territory, the threat against the very promise of a global, open internet has never been bigger. So this is the time to build a democratic digital convention involving civil society groups, private companies, and yes, governments. This digital democratic convention would develop a global democratic set of norms that would be ascribed to, no matter where a company is located. We must draw a line in the sand. Governments must be stopped from interfering with people's rights and the core infrastructure of the internet. But tech companies should be stopped when they interfere with core democratic principles. The alternative, an internet ruled by the law of the jungle, is unfolding before our eyes. We see a science fiction version of 1984 with total control of people's every digital move. Leadership is key, not only as a moral or civic duty, but it's in our self-interest to deliver upon the promise of a networked society that empowers individuals and respects and protects fundamental rights online. So instead of promising to press the pause button on globalization and digitization, or dreaming of a return to a romanticized past, it is our role to redesign governance in a hyper-connected world and to base it on the very democratic values that have brought people the highest quality of life, instead of us adopting norms that others set, whether for maximal power or profit. But this global ambition starts with credibility at home. Clearly, retreating behind borders or walls is not an option when the world gets more connected every day and when so much is at stake. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. It is now my great pleasure to continue the conversation about technology and democracy and the challenges we face. And I would like to welcome on stage Siva Vaidhyanathan, who is a professor of media studies at the University of Virginia. He is the author of the book, The Googlization of Everything. Let's welcome him.
Thank you, Marietje.
Thank you. So let me start by asking you, what went wrong? Because there was such a promise of the revolutionary impact that technology would bring, and here we are.
Well, you mentioned George Orwell's 1984. I'd like to reflect on a different book, a different dystopian book, which was Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. In that book, the authoritarian mindset takes over, not because we're afraid of some centralized power that surveils everything and instructs us through fear. But in that book, the citizens are lulled into complacency. They're so entertained, they're so distracted, they're so fractured that they don't care about retaining power in the people. And I think that actually might be our greater fear. But remember, back in 2011, early 2011, as we watched on our television screens, young people filling the streets of Tunis and Cairo, and we thought at that moment, oh my gosh, this was a story we were told. We were told that social media platforms were engaging and informing and organizing these uprisings and striking a blow for democracy. And we thought, oh my gosh, 2011 is 1989 all over again.
People talked about Twitter revolutions.
They
I remember even Facebook revolutions. And, yeah.
It turned out not to be accurate and not to be true and not to be complete. In fact, what we've learned since, especially in 2016 and 17, is that if you wanted to build a machine to spread propaganda for authoritarianism and nationalism, religious nationalism, ethnic nationalism, you could not do better than our current social media platforms. They're basically designed for that. They're designed for that because they amplify powerful emotions. That's what their algorithms are designed to do. Every time we see something that generates powerful emotions, we click, we share, we comment. And we teach those algorithms to spread those high emotion messages as far as we can do. So what counts as high emotions? What generates high emotions? Pictures of puppies, pictures of children, and hate speech. I mean, there's more to it, but...
Quite a difference.
Exactly. So what have we seen in recent years? We've seen the rise of dangerous nationalisms that have been energized and guided and essentially performed on social media platforms in places like the Philippines, like India, like most alarmingly in Myanmar.
But is this also a bit of a sort of, what people would label a cat and mouse situation where agency is mostly extended? So yes, individuals are more empowered, but so are governments or those who are in the boardrooms of these big companies. How do you see that? Or is it really only exacerbating these very powerful feelings of hate in the cases of the countries you mentioned?
Any strong emotion. That strong emotion can be towards something that we might consider positive, right? You could, and we do see people use these tools to organize for civil rights, for human rights, for voting rights. We see them at the local level, we see them at the global level. So it's not that these
I've used tools, it for my campaigning.
Exactly, right? So they're very powerful tools for motivation, but they're not powerful tools for deliberation or debate. And so what we've had by structuring our political lives through these tools, we've rendered ourselves highly motivated, angry, and yet disconnected, especially from those who might disagree with us.
So is this emotion of anger stronger than an emotion of, happiness or...
Well, the happiness stuff, the puppies and the babies, that's what social media platforms were created to do. And we all signed up for them because we wanted to see pictures of our cousins' babies and lots of other cute, lovely things. Yeah. But since that time, since we first signed on to social media, the whole idea, as driven by these companies, has changed to the point where Facebook especially now strives to be the operating system of your life. It wants to guide your commercial life, your intellectual life, your political life, and your social life. And by allowing ourselves to be so immersed and distracted, and by allowing this company to reach 2.2 billion people around the world, we've essentially bought into Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
And can you talk a little bit about the global differences? Because what you're saying is it's very powerful. We're talking about, operating system of life. I mean, that's a challenging concept.
Yes.
But of course, life in different parts of the world is very different.
Yes.
You spoke briefly about Myanmar, where we're seeing very concerning developments. What do you think could be the different impact, the specific impact in countries that are not as free as the democracies of this world, or where perhaps a different political system is governing?
So many parts of the world have different media ecosystems. And so much of our discussion, I think, is unfortunately guided by the rather complex media ecosystem of North America or Western Europe, where we have multiple outlets. We might not get all of our news from Facebook. We might only get half of our news from Facebook, which is probably bad enough. But in a place like Myanmar, where it had been a closed society for so many decades, and then only in 2014 did people get high-speed phone connections, data connections through their phones. And immediately, Facebook came into that society and introduced its sort of socially generous, as it phrases it, service called Free Basics, where people who use Facebook on their phones don't have to count that use against their data plans. So essentially, in Myanmar, Facebook is the entire information ecosystem. It's the only source of information. It's the only source of propaganda. And those who would want to foster genocide are using Facebook quite effectively.
Yeah, no, I think also for us policymakers, this, of course, is a huge challenge, how to make sure that we still aspire to get all of the internet to all of the people, all of the time,
so I'm wondering what you
as well
see,
as the rights.
like what are the points of resistance that you see, points of resistance and hope in Europe or in Kenya, where you were most recently working? I mean, are there people working on platforms that can undo some of this or push back against it? Are there motivations and movements going on?
Well, I think the whole posting of junk news and spreading of sensational stories is one that we see globally. Also in Kenya, where ethnic tensions are unfortunately very, very strong. And rumors spread like wildfire, and it could lead to real actions. It's not just a story people read online and then they go on with their lives, but it can lead to people taking to the streets and, unfortunately using violence at times as well. So indeed, I think also for us policymakers, European Union is one of the biggest donors to development programs. The whole notion of media literacy, pluralism, freedom of expression, to have different voices countering each other is crucial, so that we don't leave it up to some minor initiatives where there's no diverse voices reaching people, and where people may be confronted with technologies where the education is not yet there. And I think we're all struggling with that. It's not a global south or developed world issue. I think this educational issue is hugely important.
And that's one of the reasons I'm excited by the idea of creating a global conversation about these very issues, which is what you spoke about just moments ago. But beyond that, I think there's a lot that we can do. So imagine
Yes, let's talk about what we can do instead of the doom and gloom, and also what people here at the Obama summit can do themselves.
I have some answers, but let's not pretend that they're going to fix anything.
That's okay. Let's make
But imagine this. What if you measured for 1 week the amount of time you spend on social media, and you cut that time in half, and you took that time and you devoted it to volunteering in your community or engaging with your neighbors in some positive way?
Yes.
Right? So that little bit of contribution, that little bit of shift in your attention, and this is really the thing. It's about the battle for your attention. And eventually we also need then to reinvest in the countervailing forces that support science and education and positive political engagement. Execute your politics locally, in your barbershops, in your barrooms, across your fences. Just a few blocks from here is the Harold Washington Library. It's one of my favorite buildings in the United States of America. It's a symbol of all that we can be and aspire to be, a place where communities can gather and hash out difficult issues in their community. And if you go in there any weekday, you will see elementary school kids looking for a quiet, well-lit place where they can do their homework. You can see people seeking dependable information, knowing that it's a hard thing to find these days. You can also see homeless people seeking a moment of heat or relief, and maybe a few minutes with the newspaper. And that sense that all people in this city are welcome in that place, and that building is so well constructed, well invested, That's a symbol of what we need to be spending our time and resources on instead of social media. Now, given that, we have to actually actively reinvest in our schools, our communities, and especially our libraries. But also we have to reinvest in each other. It is so much better to offer someone a handshake than to offer a click, a like, and a comment.
Well, that's easy. Thank you, Siva. Thank you. Thank you.